This week we're going to be learning about quadrilaterals. You might be thinking, what is a quadrilateral? Well, the word itself tells you what it is. We can break this word down into two parts. We have quadri, and lateral. You might already know that the prefix quad means 4. And we learned last week that lateral means side. So a quadrilateral is any shape that has 4 sides. The first thing we need to talk about is the qualities of shapes. So there's some different things. All shapes have angles, which we learned last week. All shapes have sides. And those sides can be parallel. And we also have this word called congruent. You might have heard some of these before, but we need to go over them, make sure everybody is on the same page and everybody remembers what these words mean. So first, we have angles. We learned about angles last week. You can have a right angle, you can have an acute angle, or you can have an obtuse angle. So you should be familiar with those by now. Sides, for quadrilaterals, we're only worrying about 4-sided shapes right now. And if a shape has 4 sides, it's going to have 4 angles. So it has 4 sides, it's going to have 4 angles. That's just how it works. There's just no way around it. Parallel, parallel means that 2 lines go together and they will never cross. They're perfectly lined up with each other and they will go on forever and they will never cross each other. So some things that you can think about are like a railroad track, or maybe like 2 arrows going the same direction. And they can go any direction. They don't have to just go left and right. They can go sideways, they can go up and down, they can go any which way. Doesn't matter. It just matters that and they can go opposite ways too. Maybe one arrow's going this way and one person's going the other way. Those could be parallel lines too. They could be really far apart. They don't have to be right next to each other. It just means that these lines, if you extend them outwards, they're never going to cross. And they can actually even be going in both directions. So if they go this way forever, they will never cross. And if they go this way forever, they'll never cross. They're perfectly lined up to each other. And the way that you can remember what this word means, little trick, is that it has a pair of parallel lines in the word. The last word that we're going to learn about is congruent. And congruent, really, honestly, is just a fancy word to say the same or equal. So we might get something like, you might see something like congruent angles. All that means is that they're the same angle. These angles are congruent because they're the same angle. Maybe they're both 30 degrees. Those would be congruent. And the same thing with sides. You can have congruent sides. If you have congruent sides, that literally just means the sides are equal. So if they're the same length, let's say I have something like this, I can show with my little lines. Those two are congruent because they are the same length. And maybe these are different lengths, but these two opposite sides are congruent because they have the same length. But this side and the top side would not be congruent because obviously they're not the same length. But this could be in other shapes too. You could have congruent lengths in a triangle, or it doesn't have to be parallel either. You could have something like this, and these two sides could be congruent, but maybe the other two sides aren't. So literally all it means is that they're just the same length. So first off, we have a shape called a quadrilateral. But it's not just one shape. A quadrilateral is any shape with 4 sides. So all of these things that we're going to talk about all of these shapes that you're going to learn next, they are also quadrilaterals. So some shapes can be called two different things, even though we usually only call them one thing. They can technically fit into two different categories. There's lots of shapes that fit into multiple categories. So the first one we're going to learn about is the classic square. So a square, we've all seen, you've probably learned it in kindergarten. A square has all equal sides, obviously 4 sides. All of them are equal, and it has 2 sets of parallel lines. So in order for a shape to be qualified as a square, it has to have all equal sides, and it has to have obviously 4 sides. That's a given. I'm not going to write that part down. All equal sides, and it has to have 2 sets of parallel. Now this little sign right here, this stands for parallel, because you can see there's 2 parallel lines there. That's just a little symbol in math, and makes it go faster. 2 sets of parallel. Okay, so that's our square. We have a rectangle. Now in order for a shape to be a rectangle, it needs to have 4 sides. Oh, this also needs to have 4 right angles. So to be a rectangle, it has to have 4 right angles. So in each of those corners, you can tell that there's a right angle, because it's a rectangle. 4 right angles, and it needs to have 2 sets of parallel sides. So the difference between a square and a rectangle is that you don't have to have all of the sides the same length. You do still need to have 2 sets of parallel sides. So what ends up happening is these 2 sides are equal and these 2 sides are equal, but they're not all the same. But a square can still technically be classified as a rectangle, because if I draw this shape, if I draw a square, and I look at the rule, so the rule is that a rectangle has to have 4 right angles and 2 sets of parallel sides. So look at this. The square does have 4 right angles, and it does have 2 sets of parallel sides. All the sides happen to be equal. So a square is actually a special type of rectangle. Okay, next we have a parallelogram. And a parallelogram, the only rule it has is that it has 2 sets of parallel sides. So the top and the bottom are parallel to each other, and the sides are parallel to each other. That's the only rule. So it's kind of like you take a rectangle and you just kind of tilt it a little bit. So let's say that I have a rectangle here. This qualifies as a rectangle because it has 4 right angles in it. It has 4 sides, and it has 2 sets of parallel sides. Now, if I want to make a parallelogram, all I have to do is just shift it a little bit. I still have 4 sides. These 2 sides are still parallel. These 2 sides are still parallel. So I have a parallelogram instead of a rectangle. But the rectangle and the parallelogram have some of the same rules. So the special rule that the right angle has is that it has 4 right angles. And this one says, well, you don't need those 4 right angles. You can have any angles you want as long as you have 2 sides that are parallel, 2 sets of sides that are parallel. And so basically, if I turn this back into a rectangle, well, I still have 2 sides that are parallel, right? Yes. Does it matter what the angles are? No, the parallelogram doesn't care what the angles are. It just wants 2 sets of parallel sides. Okay, so then is a rectangle a parallelogram? Yeah, a rectangle is a parallelogram. But is a parallelogram necessarily a rectangle? No. So a rectangle is a special type of parallelogram, and a square is a special type of rectangle. So a square is also a parallelogram, because look, we have two sets of parallel sides. These two sides are parallel, and those two sides are parallel. Boom, fits in the category of parallelogram. The next one we have is called a rhombus. So a rhombus is a special type of parallelogram. A rhombus is a parallelogram with all equal sides. So it has two sets of parallel sides and it has all congruent sides. So a rhombus can fit into the category of parallelogram because it has two sets of parallel sides. So a rhombus is basically a special type of parallelogram. So a square could also be called a rhombus because a square has two sets of parallel sides and it has all congruent sides. So a square could be a rhombus, but a rhombus can't be called a square because the rhombus doesn't have those 4 right angles. So it's like you took a square and you tilted it. So a trapezoid commonly looks like this. You've probably seen one before. And a trapezoid has exactly one pair of parallel sides. So this one and this one are parallel, but the other two sides are not parallel. And it doesn't really care what lengths the sides are, it just cares about if they're parallel or not. So it only wants one pair of parallel sides, and then the lengths of the different sides can be whatever you want. As long as you got that one pair of parallel sides, we don't care about the lengths. And then actually the last one we're going to learn about, I'm running out of room, so I'm going to do it over here in the corner. The last one we're going to learn about is called a trapezium. Or a trapezium, however you want to say it. And this kind of shape has no parallel sides. The trapezium has no parallel sides. So it's completely different than all the other ones. It doesn't have any sides that are parallel. It could have sides that are the same length, but usually it does not because there are no sides that are parallel, and usually when that happens, you can't make the sides the same length. So these are all the different classifications of quadrilaterals. These are the rules that define the shapes. So you have to follow the rules to be able to classify the shape as a certain shape. And I'm going to post a beautiful sheet of all these rules and all the different shapes. And one last thing I want to do is give you another little chart for you to understand these. So this is called the Quadrilateral Club. And you got to have 4 sides to get into this club. You can only get in if you have 4 sides. First of all, we have the parallelograms. So what you find out when you get into this club is that there's lots of different levels and rooms to this club. So if you got 4 sides, then you can usually get into the parallelogram club. So the rule is to get into the parallelogram club,
you must have 2 pairs of parallel sides.
So you got 2 pairs of parallel sides, you can get into this club. So here we got some friends. Here we got some shapes hanging out, having a great time. Got some parallelograms hanging out in the parallelogram club. And then next, we have the rectangle club. So for the rectangle club, the rule to get in the rectangle club, you must have 4 right angles and must have 2 pairs of parallel sides. So you can tell So a rectangle, he can wander into the parallelogram club. And they're like, yeah, come on in, man. You know, you got 2 pairs of parallel sides. You're welcome in our club. And the rectangle keeps walking. They're like, no. You want to be in the rectangle club. We got 4 right angles in here. And these guys are like, wait, but I want to get in. Why can't I come in? They're like, you got 4 right angles? They're like, no. They're like, sorry, can't join our club. Next up, we have the rhombus club. And I overlap those on purpose. You're going to see why. So now we got the rhombus club. And for the rhombus club, number 1, must have 2 pairs of parallel sides. Number 2, must have 4 equal sides. So these rectangles are like, hey, let me in. And these guys are like, nope, because you don't have 4 equal sides. You got the other parts, but you don't have 4 equal sides, so sorry, bud, can't come in. So a lot of times, rhombuses look like diamonds. Pretty cool. So we got some rhombuses in here. They're very hard for me to draw for some reason. And then over here in the rectangle club, I forgot to draw these guys hanging out in their rectangle club. We got rectangles over here. Being cool, doing rectangle things. And then in the middle, the very last, the coolest of the cool, the most exclusive, is we have the square club. And in this case, you want to be square because you can get into any club. Because the rules for this club, you must have 2 pairs of parallel sides. You must have all equal sides, and you must have 4 right angles. I abbreviated that. The RT means right, and that little sign means angles because I had no more room. And we're going to draw a nice little square. So here's all the layers. So we can see that some of the shapes can get into different clubs. So the parallelograms, unfortunately, they can only get into the parallelogram club. They can't go any farther. This is your club. That's it, friend. Sorry. Then the rectangles, they can go into the parallel club if they want. They can go into the rectangle club, but that's it. They can only go into these 2. The rhombuses, they can go into the rhombus club. They can go to the parallelogram club, but they can't get into the other 2 clubs. But the squares, dude, the squares can get into any club they want. Because they're like, hey, rules says you gotta have 2 pairs of parallel sides. Square's like, yeah, I got that. Don't you worry. Square walks into the parallelogram club, having a great time. And then the square's like, you know what? I wanna walk into the rectangle club. I heard they got trampolines in there. I heard it's real fun. I'm gonna go into the rectangle club. Walks in the rectangle club. They're like, whoa, you gotta have 4 right angles to be in here. Square's like, yeah, don't worry about it. I got 4 right angles. They're like, well, you gotta have 2 parallel sides as well. And the Square's like, dude, I've got it. Don't worry. They're like, okay, cool. Come on in. Then he's like, oh, let me check out the rhombus club. They're like, hey, man, you gotta have 2 sets of parallel sides coming here. He's like, yeah, I have that. I got into the parallelogram club, didn't I? And they're like, well, do you have 4 equal sides? And he's like, yeah, I'm a square. And the rhombus club's like, all right, cool, man, come on in. So he comes on in, I don't know, maybe plays checkers or something in that club. Then he's like, you know what? I'm so special. Y'all, I'm like so special. So I'm just gonna make my own club for squares. And he's like, I'm gonna put it right in between the rectangle and rhombus club because I can be both of those. So then makes his own club, Has his own rules. Square club. Hope you liked my little story. And then, oh no, poor trapezoid. Poor trapezoid. He's just out here with only one pair of parallel sides, and he's just crying because he can't be in any of the clubs. But then we got good old our trapezium, and he's like, man, you think you got it rough. I don't even have one pair of parallel sides. And they're like, oh, boo-hoo-hoo. But then they're like, hey, why don't we just form our own club? And they do. And they're in their own club. But they don't get to go into the cool one. Poor guys. All right, so that's Parallelogram Club. I hope you guys liked it. So I will post this also. And then if you want to look at that, and if it helps you out, then awesome. All these guys are happy. If that helps you out, awesome. If not, then I'm sorry. Text me, call me, email me, FaceTime me, whatever, so I can help you out.